female situation. She stands at the crossroads of two well-developed ideologies in America. One about women and one about the Negro. That black women were exceptionally sensual gained credence when Europeans landed on the shores of Africa. Not used to the requirements of the tropical climate, these men mistook semi-nudity for lewdness. They misrepresented African cultural traditions so that polygamy was attributed to African people's uncontrollable lust. Tribal dances were reduced to the level of orgy. African religion lost the sacredness that sustained generations of ancestral worshipers. Travel accounts contain analysis of African life and conclusions about the character of black women as fiery and warm and so much hotter than their men. Others wrote back about hot ladies who are always contriving strategies so that they could gain a lover. One such report even said that orangutan-like creatures often attack and use violence on the black women whenever they would meet her alone in the woods. Such descriptions are found in the writings of North American and white Caribbean travelers and planters. From Haiti to Cuba to Trinidad to St. Lucia to Martinique, and specifically from Jamaica, came a poem dedicated to the stable Venus, in which black dames, well-versed in Venus school, make love an art. By 1736, you could read it in the South Carolina Gazette. African ladies of strong, robust constitution who were not easily jaded out, but able to serve their lovers all day and all night. By the 19th century, coarse jokes about Negro wenches were commonplace. Everybody accepted the premise upon which they rested. Poets wrote from all over the place. The sexual habits of black women render men callous to all the finer sensations of love and female excellence. In almost every house, there were Negro women, slaves, who counted an honor to bring a mulatto into the world. Even abolitionists wrote that mulatto women were gratified by the criminal advances of Saxons. Even the way we moved and danced was reframed. The way they saw it, black women went into vulgar hysterics when dancing with members of the opposite sex. The process was complete throughout the French, Dutch, Portuguese, English, Spanish colonies, including the antebellum South. Everybody was convinced that slave women, black women, were lewd and lascivious, that they invited sexual violence from white men, and that any resistance they displayed was just fake. The view that black women had exceptionally high libidos was nourished by the conditions under which slave women lived and worked in the field, in the house, in the slave quarters to produce and reproduce. American slavery was dependent on natural increase of the population, and through the use of countless means, planters made sure that slave women were fruitful and multiplied. Since casual correlations have always been drawn between sensuality and fruitfulness, the increase of slave populations on any plantation only served as more evidence of the slave woman's lust. Many slave owners associated reproduction and promiscuity when they linked the high birth rate of slaves on their plantations, and they encouraged and bragged about the early onset of sexual activity amongst young black girls. Major periodicals carried articles detailing optimal conditions under which black women were known to reproduce, and the merits of the particular breeder was often the topic of parlor or dinner table conversations. Conditions under which black women worked, were sold, and were punished also fostered an atmosphere conducive to these destructive ideas. Just as with reproduction, that which was private and personal became public and familiar. On the auction block, black women's bodies were exposed and handled to determine their capacity for childbearing. Slave buyers sometimes squeeze women's stomachs in an attempt to determine how many children a black woman could have. They expose breasts, thighs, buttocks. Since Southern society associated public nudity with lascivity, this exposure of the slave woman's body led to an unconscious equating of black women with promiscuity. On the large plantations, the dresses of slaves were particularly ragged. Some women had such tattered clothes that they were almost naked. Sometimes slave women were exposed due to the nature of their work, and female slaves on rice plantations worked in water with their dresses wreathed up around their hips, exposing their legs and thighs. Many female hands worked with their skirts up to keep them out of dirt and mud, and house servants pulled up their skirts to wash and polish floors. So in the South, where it was not unusual for female slaves to work bent over with their skirts up, it was easy, too easy, for all to come to such conclusions about what the black female is. And then there were the whippings. Drunken, rage, vicious, sexualized whippings. The exposure of women's bodies during the whippings, laid out on the ground on benches, posts, and/or tables with their skirts lifted over their heads. Folks used to recall the whipping of a 13-year-old black girl in Georgia, which had particular disturbing sexual overtones. The girl was put on all fours, sometimes head down, sometimes head up, and then she was beaten until froth ran from her mouth. When